Hi, it's Brian. I'm an ex-Christian, and I wanted to share a conversation I had with the YouTube Apologist Testify. I think it exposes how Testify's worldview leads to a sinister form of ethnocentrism, and how his view of the fairness of God cannot be vindicated. I'll also show how he is seemingly unable to comprehend the devastating nature of the hell he believes in, and to discuss some of the destructive consequences of his worldview. You can find the link to the full conversation in the description, but I'll dive into the conversation now. I started the dialogue by trying to determine if Testify thought that God was a fair God. You would think that this would be a pretty low bar to start with, but he tripped up right away. Is everyone deserving of hell?
Yeah, everyone has sinned, so everybody is deserving of hell.
But how can a fair God decide that some go to hell and some don't when all deserve hell?
It's not because he doesn't judge people by fairness.
So he's not fair.
If he gave us justice, then yeah, we would all go to hell. So it's only mercy that anybody would go to heaven.
Testify all but admits that God is not fair, saying that he does not judge by fairness. Already he is employing a well-used apologetic tactic, misdirection. For Testify, it is okay to say that God is unfair in this way, because at least some people like him get to experience salvation. He fails to realize that a perfect God needs to be held to a perfect standard of fairness. I tried to press him a little on this. I don't think it's fair that God would send some people to heaven when all people deserve hell. So I'll explain a little bit what I think are the two fair options, and you can push back and tell me if my premise is false. I think that there's two. If everyone is deserving of hell, there's two fair options. One fair option is everyone goes to hell because everyone deserves it and they all get equal treatment. And the other fair option is everyone goes to heaven because everyone deserves hell, but God intervenes for all people, and therefore it's fair that everyone gets saved.
So the only acceptable view of God is universalism?
Yeah, well, I think so. If you want God to be fair, either that
so
or
if you say no, I don't want your mercy, I would rather reject you, and I'll take my chances with your justice.
So the majority of people don't make that decision. The majority of people who I think you would say go to hell have absolutely no conception of the Christian God, or they have a conception of a Christian God, but they're not intellectually convinced that he exists. So
I wouldn't say that. I would say they're morally culpable.
So you think that, say, an Amazonian, right, stuck in the jungle, never received the Bible, no concept of Yahweh, they're morally culpable for understanding the Bible?
I believe that they would know that there is a God who exists, according to Romans chapter 1, verse 20, that it's clear that there's a God who exists in creation, who created the world. And I believe that they would have a conscience that would convict them of sin and tell them that what the difference between right and wrong is, that the law would be written upon their heart, so they would have some kind of revelation.
But aren't we taught in Romans that all people fall short of that standard? So even though all people have the law written on our hearts, that all people fall short of that standard and therefore are deserving of judgment. So how would that Amazonian be able to find salvation without knowing Jesus?
Who would say that if the gospel was presented to that Amazonian that he would accept it?
But I'm not talking about a scenario where the gospel is presented. I'm talking about a scenario where the gospel is not presented.
Wouldn't God, who would be able to order the world and know what all decisions people would make or wouldn't make if they were presented with certain knowledge, know that, and so order the world that everybody who would hear the gospel would accept it, and all those who'd never hear it would have rejected it anyways? Isn't that?
Okay, so I understand. So essentially what you're saying is that the Western societies which have received the gospel and the ancient West Asian societies which received the gospels are divine favorites of God, and the people say in
you just completely straw man my position. You completely straw man it.
You said that
because
God would
you said that the Western, first of all, you smuggled in some sort of like cultural arrogance that I would have. And then second of all, you said that God has favorites and he's just picking and choosing. I'm not saying that at all.
Well, what you said is that
I'm saying that God could have so ordered the world that if you were born at a certain time in a certain place and you don't hear the gospel, even if you would have heard the gospel, and if you were in a different time in a different place, you still would have rejected it.
This is the core position of Testify throughout the conversation, that the regions of the world that went without the gospel for long periods of time were filled with people that God knew would reject him anyway. I'll skip a decent amount of the conversation as we ended up rehashing this point a few times. Okay, so let me just quickly summarize so that we're not going in circles what you're saying, and you can tell me if I've misunderstood. What you're saying is that essentially that humans are responsible for their own salvation in so much as they respond to the gospel. We have genuine free will in order to do so. In your view, there were some people in the places that had the gospel between 0 and 1500 AD who would respond to it positively, but there was not a single person in the rest of the geographical world, the majority geographical world, that would respond in that way.
I don't think that that's implausible, because there are places that reject the gospel like all the time. I mean, you heard of this, like the history of Japan, and like how they literally destroyed and chased out missionaries every time they came there. Like,
yeah, but people still
mauled
became
them,
Christians.
and not very many, and not for very long. And so,
but it doesn't matter. One soul matters, right? So a single soul matters. So Japanese people, in my view, as I understand it, Japanese people didn't have a chance to respond to the gospel until they received the gospel. And for whatever reason, I mean, you say that God knew that none of them would have responded. But to me, it's very suspicious that as soon as the gospel arrived, people did respond. And that we see that everywhere. As soon as
a lot of people responded.
But it doesn't matter. If a single person responds, then it's worth it, right? You think it's an eternal win, right? It doesn't matter how many.
I think we're going in circles, because what I'm saying is you've already heard what I've said. I think he orders the world in such a way that whoever is going to hear the gospel and would receive it, he knows that that's what's going to happen. So I don't see anything that goes against God being all powerful or all loving with that particular statement. It's not inconsistent with some people never hear the gospel and are lost. There's no explicit contradiction there. So at best, you could just say, I find this implausible.
I find it contradictory. I find it contradictory with a universally loving and fair God. I don't find it contradictory.
No, it's not. What is the explicit contradiction? What is the explicit contradiction?
Well, the explicit contradiction, I think, comes from the premise that God loves all people equally, right? Regardless of who they are. And I just think that it's implausible to argue that there would have been an unbroken gap of 1,500 years. I mean, I would say, like, let's talk about Australian Aboriginals, 65,000 years, an unbroken gap of 65,000 years, right? How many millions of people is that? Probably upwards of 1 billion of people in continental Australia who didn't have access to the gospel. I find it implausible that a universally loving God who created all people with an equal opportunity to be able to find.
But you say it's plausible, but it's not a contradiction.
Well, I think it is contradictory with a God who, like, you know, you were talking about probabilities, right? What's the probability that there wouldn't have been a single person for 65,000 years if all people are created with?
I'm not in a position to judge that. Neither are you. You're just going by what feels like, what seems like, what I think. You don't know that.
Well, in a certain way, we can't. So here's what I would do, right? I would say I would look at the amount of people that respond to the Bible by accepting God, and I would you could take a sort of rudimentary probability. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of wiggle room there, but you might say 1 in 100 people who read the gospel respond to God by becoming a Christian, right? So then we would say maybe there's a 1 in 100 person, there's a 1 in 100 chance, there's a 1% chance.
But you're just making these numbers out of what you think is possible.
No, but we can observe it based on our current status in society. Unless you think that there was something unique about the Australian Aboriginals which made them less likely to.
You're trying to continue to paint me as some kind of like xenocentric, I don't know, whatever, racist kind of person or something.
No, I don't think you are. I don't think you are. I just think that the worldview leads to that. I don't see how you can judge. So essentially, here's my question, right? So if you say that there isn't a different probability of these Aboriginal Australians of being Christians,
cutting out again.
What is it? What is it that's unique about Australian Aboriginals that makes them much less likely to accept God? That's my question.
That's terrible. Dude, I've already answered this stuff. Like, no, that's crazy. You're asking like a question. It's kind of like a question like, have you stopped beating your wife yet? You know, it's just like, no.
Here, Testify quips that my line of questioning is sneaking in inappropriate assumptions, but really, he's projecting what he knows to be the logical conclusion of his own worldview. If continental Australia was a place where God placed 65,000 years of souls he knew would not seek him, it is perfectly reasonable to ask what makes Indigenous Australian culture distinct from West Asian, European, or African culture, where we see high rates of historic Christianity. He is incredibly uncomfortable with the assertion that you would be able to recognise cultural differences between cultures he believes to be godless and those with access to God. The conclusion of his worldview is precisely the logic that was used to justify colonial abuse of native peoples as lesser or godless. I'm not shoving this conclusion down his throat. Instead, he is able to recognize it instantly, and he projects it back onto me accusationally. I think we can find common ground here. I see where you're coming from in terms of sort of it, to a certain extent, we're sort of speculating, right? We're talking beyond what the Bible says. I'm trying to take the Bible soteriology to a logical conclusion, and my interpretation, right, is that the Bible was written by specific authors in a specific geographical context, and so they didn't even worry about this, right? Because they didn't even know that Australia existed. They didn't even know the Americas existed. I think it's a massive, actually, theodicy issue to later realize actually there were these people for 65,000 years who didn't have the same opportunity to, or you would say, who God knew wouldn't respond even if they did have the opportunity to.
But if they would have had the opportunity, and God knows that, there's nothing unfair about God's decision.
Sure, and so essentially you're speculating, right? That's not biblical. Like what you're saying is not biblical. Like you're sort of providing
no, it is biblical because I know because it's consistent with God's omniscience.
Well, no, because like you said, you could come up with an alternate explanation, right? So
I'm saying that God knows what people's decisions are going to make based on what situations he finds themselves in, and there's biblical evidence that supports that.
Yeah, sure, but it's not explicitly biblical that that all the people in Australia God knew would not respond to him positively, so he put them there in Australia.
See, again, you're wording it in such a way like that it's going to sound like the ugliest way possible.
Now Testify objects to my phrasing, accusing me of making it sound as ugly as I could. I could have chosen far more emotive or damning ways to summarize his argument, but instead I'll play the final part of our conversation now, where Testify asked me to propose a better alternative solution if I were to play God. And I mean, to be honest,
because they would freely, if they would have freely rejected him anyways. It's not feasible. If it's not feasible for a God to guarantee a world of universal salvation, then like what else is he supposed to do? What's his alternative? What should he have done instead?
Well, I mean, it's your God, not mine. I would say if he's omniscient,
no. Since you like to speculate about what God would do, what should he have done instead?
Well, so you're saying that within I'm saying your own boundaries,
human free will. I'm saying given human free will.
Yes.
If he cannot guarantee a world of universal free salvation, if it's not feasible to God, given human free will, what else is he supposed to do?
I think I would have two responses. One, I think that eternal suffering outweighs eternal salvation. So I would say he shouldn't have made the world, because I think
it's basically better off. We're better off not existing at all. God should have never created anybody.
Well, it sounds bad when you say it like that, but the reason for that, right, is that the vast majority.
It's an anti-natalist argument, basically. It's
and he's
extreme.
I'm not an anti-natalist, but I'm just saying by your own.
But I'm saying it's logically since you're saying that, like you're trying to say that I'm a xenocentric person by logical consistency, then I'm going to say that you're an anti-natalist by logical consistency.
No, because I'm working within an.
Well, it's not fair.
I actually don't believe in God at all, so you don't have to.
Right. But I know you don't believe in God.
Testify is falsely equivocating here. He's not able to recognize that I don't believe in the premises that he's limited to. So he thinks that me arriving at an anti-natalist position is in some way equivalent to his ethnocentric view of salvation. He can't recognize that I'm running an internal critique of his own beliefs.
I'm saying that you're taking like that kind of view logically consistently. There are some people that just should never be born.
Yeah, so what I would say is that if the vast majority of people are going to suffer for all eternity, right, in the most unimaginable way, right, go to hell, and some people get to go to heaven, I think a fair God would have made those people. If he seriously has no recourse, then yes,
that world isn't feasible to God, and so you're saying he shouldn't create a world at all.
Yeah, by your own logic, yes.
So God should not have created a world at all, because it's not feasible for him to create a world in which like there's not universal salvation.
Not universal, but where the vast majority of people experience eternal damnation.
I'm saying it might not be feasible to God to make a world where the vast majority of people have. How many billions of Christians have existed over the past however many thousand years? You might say, well, that outweighs all the people that rejected him or whatever.
Yeah, that's
But
right. It's far, far less than the people who rejected him.
so yeah, but so you're on your view that like nobody should have been created at all, even though he gave people a choice, he gave them a free will, and he gave them life, he gave them all of these things that they could experience. But that's no, yeah,
Well,
I
here's a
don't.
really great alternative for you, Ben, right? Since he's omniscient and he already knows who's going to choose him, why not only make the people who are going to choose him? Because the people who are going to reject him are going
Because
to have
that's
a
a
net.
world that's not feasible to God. You can't create
Why is that not feasible? He's
because you
omniscient.
can't create a world where just everybody is going to freely receive, like,
Why not?
believe in you, because people
But
people have a choice.
yeah, people have a choice. But so let's say that he had a conception of everyone who was created, but then he knows who's not going to go to heaven. So all he has to do is identify the people who aren't going to go to heaven and not create those people. Their non-existence is going to be far superior to their existence.
Right. I'm saying I don't think that that's feasible for God to be able
Why
to
is that
create a
not
world like
feasible?
that. Why is it not feasible?
Yeah.
Because I think that you're creating, if you create a pair of people are going to reproduce, and they're going to billions and billions of people are going to be born into the planet. And so like it's not
Yeah,
like you can't just guarantee that every single person that out of their union, out of their own choice, is going to freely decide to accept God, love God, receive
I
God.
think you're forgetting the omniscience of God. God could just say if that couple were about to have a child who was going to go to hell, he could just cause an abortion, or he could cause infertility, right? I don't see how that's an
So an
incongruence.
antinatalism it is. Antinatalism it is. All right. Yeah, thanks for coming, man. Watch your head. So he should have killed them in the womb, you know. Never mind that this world is like a world of good and that there is a choice, right? Um, and so yeah, just never mind all that. Um, yeah, it's I don't know, man. That's crazy. That's crazy. And so anyway, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? God should abort them or cause them not even to be born. You know, like I think giving people a free will is a good thing to do. I think giving people an opportunity is a good thing to give them. I think God judging people is a good thing. I think it's good that we see the righteousness of God in his judgment, right? That it serves as a warning even to us. And um, so yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't think it's logically possible that God can just like only create people that are only going to receive him. I mean, that's like, no. He gives human beings a pair, right? He made a pair, and now we're at what, 8 billion people? Not one of those people is going to go wrong. Well, he should have killed them in the womb first. You know, it's just like, now you have a problem. Now another problem. God just kills people before they could ever be born, right? So he's an abortionist. Um, Right, right. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Testify does not understand how horrific the concept of eternal conscious torment in hell is. It is the most horrific thing that the human mind can possibly come up with. Yet, he doesn't see how I could argue that it would be better for someone destined for hell to have never been born at all, bringing up the goodness of life on earth. Never mind that the momentary goodness of earthly life is totally insignificant in the framing of eternal torment. He also completely backpedals on his view of free will. He expresses that it would not be possible for God to create a world without the people he knows are destined for hell. Yet, he just spent the majority of the conversation arguing that God could have somehow chosen for certain regions of the world to be only filled with people destined for hell. Him taking exception to my view that God could use his omniscience to select out all the people bound for hell is also pretty strange, given how frequently God murders babies and manipulates fertility to control the story of the Bible. Now, there's a lot more I could say on this topic, but instead I want to finish with the words of theologian and trollaway man Gary Deverell. He writes, "The movement of Christ's gospel into the indigenous communities of this country was, and is, far from straightforwardly positive, however. There is a saying in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. When the white man came, he made an exchange. The Bible for the land and the sea. It was the Bible in exchange for our languages, law, and kin as well." Testify needs to recognise how destructive his position on salvation is. He is arguing that cultures such as the Trollaway people were totally godless to a greater extent than societies that did have some people repenting and accepting God's forgiveness.